So this is an opportunity now to pivot to the Q&A segment. We're a little bit ahead of time, which means we have more time for questions, or if we manage to be efficient there, we'll end a little bit early. We have one question already, and this is for all the speakers. Is the regulatory and policy environment supportive of CHP in the US, Italy, and in Mexico? And what opportunities, challenges for CHP as most governments pass climate action legislation? Maybe we can start in the order that we began, maybe starting with you, Roberto, and the situation in Italy in particular.
Yes.
What's been going on in terms of CHP and government support?
Yeah, at the moment, as I mentioned, there is a mechanism that supports the energy efficiency. It is a mechanism regulated by the demand and the offer. So that means that you can produce these the white certificates, and you can sell these certificates to the market. So the answer is yes. In Italy, the cogeneration is still is seen by the government in a proper way, in a good way, because of this mechanism. So it's a sort of it is not let's say a subsidy, but it is an incentive to promote the energy efficiency. And as I said in my presentation, by definition, cogeneration saved fuel and of course produce energy efficiency. In Italy, produce this kind of white certificate. I don't know if I have answered, but I can also, in case of interest of projects in Europe, we can analyze case by case scenario.
No, thank you, Roberto. Maybe a follow-up question there. Is there anything in the pipeline in Italy in terms of upcoming legislation that may further support primary energy saving, high efficiency CHP and other?
No, nothing new, but this is still active. This regulation is still active, and further, I think that to further answer this question is also we have also to check country by country, because there are still many countries that use natural gas as a fuel, and this is the case of Italy. This is the case of many other countries, and where of course making distributed power generation increase efficiency. This is the case of Italy and other countries. Making efficiency, I think that cogeneration is still a good way to do it. You're muted.
Thank you, Roberto. Going to Alex. I mean, obviously we've heard a lot about the IRA, but maybe you can speak to it more specifically and how it's been beneficial to Clark Energy, or how it will be beneficial to companies like Clark Energy.
I think the IRA is certainly an encouragement to the development of projects, and many of our customers are looking to the IRA for support funding. That said, the underpinning of most projects typically is the existing financial benefits, whether that is energy efficiency, resilience, or the tangible value of the carbon dioxide in the example of the New York project. So yes, government legislation is important, but often it is not the only part of the decision-making process.
So an incentive, but still the economics are sound in terms of the technology, in terms of saving energy, saving CO2 emissions, or using CO2 in the case of your case example. And Scott, maybe if you can, in terms of what's happening in Mexico, you mentioned the power market changing recently and being more beneficial to decentralized power generation.
Yeah, you know, I also add to what Alex said on because my specialization is more in the United States, but the IRA giving, you know, upwards of, you know, anywhere from 30% of a tax credit or a payment in lieu of tax to a CHP project, and then 40% if you have American-made content, and then 50% if you're in an energy zone, right? So these are enormous benefits, And one of the things I've found in my career is that when there are subsidies like that basically put, CHP on par with some of the other technologies that are out there with these incentives, it really goes well. One of my experiences was after Superstorm Sandy in the state of New Jersey. There was an incentive that created about 10 CHP projects in healthcare facilities that they would have never done without that sort of financial incentive. And it was kind of upwards of anywhere from $3 to $5 or $6 million a megawatt incentive, a grant, right? So it was, and this is kind of on par with that, because you're taking away 30 to 50% of the upfront capital expense by getting a tax credit or a payment in lieu of tax. So great thing for and for those out there listening, the deadlines are to get your project started this year and next year, by the end of next year, 2024, to have a very small spend on your project of roughly 5% by the end of next year. And then you'll have a number of years after that to complete your project. So just to add on to what Alex said, that's an enormous bump for CHP, or it should be anyway in this country. So we'll see. In Mexico, I'm not really expertise on that. We've seen, according to our dealer down in that part of Mexico, they saw literally in the dozens of projects for CHP over the last 10 years. I think they've slowed down a little bit, because incentives aren't maybe necessarily there at the moment like they were back then. And the gas volatility a little bit, most of the gas coming from up north, in the US, so that they saw some volatility in gas last year for sure, in gas costs. So I think there'll still be some benefits and some additional CHP plants, but I'm not aware of any specific government policy incentives.
Thank you, Scott. I think Alex wants to follow up, but if I may just very quickly, because I had a follow-up question myself regarding your presentation in Mexico. You mentioned that the CHP unit from Caterpillar provides about 35% of the plant's consumption. Is the rest coming from the grid, or is there other means of providing that electricity and power generation? Because of course, one of the benefits of CHP and on-site behind the meter is that you take that pressure away from the grid.
That's right. So the grid provides the balance of the electrical power, and they use electrical chillers to provide the balance of their cooling needs.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Alex, you wanted to?
Yeah, I think as we're a world organization, it's important to consider a few of the other countries. So one country where legislation hasn't been developing is France. France has for many years had a very buoyant cogeneration market, but there's been a political lack of will to support the heating season that develops for units in France. So France has some challenges, but is moving to hydrogen. Other government legislations that is challenging is kind of blanket, particularly on a US state basis, is blanket bans of gas for new buildings and gas in its broad sense. So, that misses out on the opportunity for hydrogen, biomethane, and there's a degree of kind of political driven motivation for those. And then in the developing world, where there's lots of gas engines installed, such as Nigeria and Bangladesh, there isn't necessarily government drivers or benefits to encourage CHP. So significant additional carbon savings could be made with tri-generation legislation or CHP legislation in developing countries too.
No, that's an excellent point, Alex. There's a lot of different things, opportunities and risks for cogeneration CHP around the world. And in fact, part of my closing remarks is just to point out that since the inception of CWC, we've begun developing a global market report on cogeneration based on statistics from the International Energy Agency, but looking specifically to CHP and looking at the different continents and also zooming into interesting countries. So that was already published, the first global market report in November last year, and we're planning to do the second edition coming out this fall. So looking, and the nice thing about this is that we can start looking at the trends over the years as we publish every sequential report, but also very interesting looking at specific countries and those opportunities and risks for cogeneration. So do look out for that, and we plan to publish that in November, and we will have a dedicated webinar focusing on that.